I just also want to remind my colleagues what one lawmaker texted to Mark Meadows after the January 6th attack, and let me quote, "Yesterday was a terrible day. We tried everything we could in our objection to the 6 states. I'm sorry that nothing worked," end quote. Now just think about that. A lawmaker is apologizing for failing to steal an election, for failing to overturn the will of the American people. I mean, is that really what our politics have become? You know, destroy democracy if your team isn't victorious.
Why is it not sufficient just to say, well, he complied up until the point when Donald Trump essentially told him to stop complying? Why is his testimony further needed by our committee?
Well, first of all, it's compelled by the subpoena. He's required by our subpoena to both produce documents and to answer questions, to appear to testify. And there are a multitude of questions that we need to ask him. We need to ask him, we need to understand what was going on, what were his discussions with the member of this body.
Okay, so this is the ultimate betrayal, and it came from the person who was closer to Trump than almost anyone else during the most critical moments of his presidency. Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, the man who was at Trump's side during the 2020 election and January 6th, has turned on his former boss in the most devastating way imaginable. He testified under immunity before a grand jury and told prosecutors exactly what they needed to hear, that Trump was dishonest about the election, that Meadows repeatedly warned him the fraud claims were baseless, and that Trump knew the truth and pushed ahead with his schemes anyway. This isn't some low-level staffer with secondhand information. This is the chief of staff, the person in the room for the most sensitive conversations, the person who saw everything and heard everything. And he's now on record under oath saying Trump lied to the American people about the 2020 election and knew he was lying when he did it. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
About making Jeffrey Clark Attorney General. Why did they want to make Jeffrey Clark Attorney General? What did he think about the letter that Jeffrey Clark was proposing to send to state legislators in Georgia to overturn the results of those elections? Why were Fox News hosts texting him, telling him that they needed to get the president out to stop this? Why did they think that the president was the one who could stop this? We can have debates and discussions about the law, about policy, about what is an appropriate role, but January 6th is not what we do here, and it can never be what we do here. And it's difficult to imagine a more important official proceeding of Congress than counting electoral votes, that those who might attempt through either action or inaction to obstruct or delay those proceedings, that we get to the facts, that we understand what our legislative role is in protecting this nation, protecting the Constitution. We must get to the objective truth and ensure that January 6th never happens again.
Sorry, my apologies, Mr. Chairman. Think about how significant this is for Trump's legal exposure. The whole defense in the January 6th cases has been built around the idea that Trump genuinely believed the election was stolen. If he sincerely thought there was fraud, the argument goes, then his actions were misguided but not criminal. He was trying to correct what he believed was a genuine wrong, but Meadows just blew that defense to pieces. He testified that he repeatedly warned Trump there was no evidence of fraud. He told the grand jury that Trump was being dishonest when he declared premature victory on election night before the results were even final. He admitted under oath that he knew, and that Trump knew, the election fraud claims weren't supported by the facts. That's devastating for any defense based on Trump's supposed good faith belief in the stolen election narrative. You can't claim you sincerely believe something when your own chief of staff is testifying that he told you multiple times it wasn't true and you ignored him. And Meadows didn't just provide testimony, he handed over documents, texts, emails, notes, the kind of contemporaneous evidence that prosecutors dream about. These documents reportedly show Trump's direct role in pressuring state officials to change election results. They show coordination with outside groups working to disrupt the certification. They show the planning that went into January 6th and the efforts to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Meadows turned over the receipts, the paper trail that connects Trump directly to the conspiracy to overturn the election. Prosecutors are calling this smoking gun evidence because it ties Trump personally to actions that go far beyond just making false claims. It shows him actively participating in schemes to subvert the democratic process. And it all came from his own chief of staff, the person he trusted most during that critical period. The fact that Trump pardoned Meadows on November 9th, 2025 makes this whole situation even more complicated and revealing. Why would you pardon someone who already testified against you under immunity? Was Trump trying to buy future loyalty? Was he hoping the pardon would somehow undo the damage of Meadows' testimony? Whatever the motivation, the pardon can't erase what Meadows already said under oath to the grand jury. That testimony exists. Those documents are in prosecutors' hands. The damage to Trump's legal position has already been done, and no pardon can take it back. Stick around because we're going to break down exactly what Meadows revealed, why his testimony is so devastating, and what this means for Trump's ongoing legal battles. All right, so let's really dig into what Mark Meadows actually testified to and why it represents such a catastrophic development for Trump's legal defense in the January 6th and election interference cases. Meadows secured immunity from prosecutors, which means he was given legal protection in exchange for his truthful testimony. When you testify under immunity, you have strong incentives to tell the truth because lying can void the immunity deal and expose you to prosecution. So what Meadows told the grand jury wasn't casual speculation or political spin. It was sworn testimony with significant personal stakes attached to being honest and complete. According to multiple reports and subsequent analyses, Meadows testified at least 3 times before the grand jury in 2023. During those sessions, he confirmed under oath that Trump was being dishonest on election night when he declared victory prematurely before the results were final. Remember that night? Trump came out and claimed he had won when millions of votes were still being counted. Meadows is now on record saying Trump knew the results weren't final and that his victory declaration was dishonest. That's the chief of staff confirming what many suspected, that Trump deliberately misled the American public about the state of the election for strategic rather than factual reasons. But it goes much further than just the election night claims. Meadows testified that he repeatedly warned Trump that there was no evidence of widespread fraud that would have changed the election outcome. Despite those warnings, Trump continued pushing the stolen election narrative publicly and privately. He continued pressuring state officials to find votes. He continued working with outside groups to develop schemes for disrupting the certification. He continued planning for January 6th, even after his own chief of staff told him the underlying claims weren't supported by the evidence. This testimony demolishes any defense based on Trump sincerely believing the election was stolen. You can't claim good faith belief when your most trusted advisor is on record saying he told you repeatedly it wasn't true. Perhaps most damaging is the documentary evidence Meadows handed over to prosecutors. He provided texts, emails, and handwritten notes that show Trump's direct involvement in various pressure campaigns and planning efforts. These aren't just Meadows' memories of conversations. These are contemporaneous records created at the time that document what Trump was saying, who he was coordinating with, and what he was trying to accomplish. Prosecutors call this kind of evidence a smoking gun because it ties the defendant directly to the alleged criminal conduct in ways that are very hard to explain away or dismiss as misunderstanding. The documents reportedly show Trump ordering the pressure campaign on state officials like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who received that now infamous call where Trump asked him to find enough votes to flip the state. They show coordination with outside groups and lawyers who were developing various schemes to prevent the certification of Biden's victory. They show the planning and discussion around January 6th itself, what Trump knew was being planned, what he expected to happen, and how he was directing or encouraging the activities of that day. All of this came from inside the White House, from the chief of staff's own files and communications, and it's now in the hands of prosecutors building their case. Meadows also had to address his own book, which promoted the stolen election narrative and portrayed Trump's efforts in a more favorable light. Under oath, Meadows apparently disavowed parts of his own book, admitting that some of what he wrote wasn't accurate or was framed to support claims he now acknowledges were baseless. This is extraordinary. A witness admitting that his own published book contained misleading information about the election and that the truth is actually much more damaging to Trump than what he publicly claimed when he was still trying to stay in Trump's good graces. The contrast between book Meadows defending Trump and testimony Meadows telling the truth under oath reveals just how much the public narrative was shaped by loyalty rather than facts. The timing and context of Meadows' cooperation is also significant. He testified in 2023 during Jack Smith's active investigation, providing the special counsel with evidence and testimony that shaped the federal charges eventually brought against Trump. Although the Georgia state case against Trump has been dropped, the information Meadows provided remains part of the evidentiary record and continues to inform the various legal proceedings still underway. Smith's office used Meadows' cooperation as part of the foundation for accessing White House records and building the obstruction and conspiracy cases against Trump. The testimony from the chief of staff gave prosecutors credibility and access they might not otherwise have had. The pardon Trump issued to Meadows on November 9, 2025 adds a strange coda to this whole saga. By that point, Meadows had already testified multiple times under immunity. The documents were already in prosecutors' hands. The damage was done, so what did the pardon accomplish? It's hard to say with certainty, but it may have been Trump's way of trying to repair the relationship or prevent Meadows from cooperating further in future proceedings. It may have been part of a broader pardon strategy for January 6th participants and allies. Whatever the thinking, the pardon doesn't undo the testimony already given or the evidence already provided. Meadows' words and documents remain part of the record regardless of his current legal status. This cooperation from Meadows connects directly to everything else we've been tracking about the legal walls closing in on Trump. Jack Smith was granted access to White House records over Trump's objections. The classified documents case features Trump's own voice on tape, admitting he knew he couldn't declassify materials he was keeping. Judge Merchan stripped away immunity in the hush money case. Courts keep rejecting the administration's sweeping claims of presidential protection. And now we have confirmation that Trump's own chief of staff told prosecutors under oath that Trump lied about the election and actively orchestrated efforts to overturn the results. Each piece of evidence reinforces the others. Each witness corroborates the pattern. The legal case against Trump isn't based on speculation or partisan interpretation box. It's based on documents, recordings, and testimony from his own inner circle. So let's break this down into what you need to understand about Meadows' testimony and what it means for Trump's legal and political position. Because this represents perhaps the most significant betrayal Trump has experienced from someone in his inner circle, and its implications are profound for everything else happening with his legal cases. First point, Meadows' testimony destroys the good faith defense that Trump's lawyers have been building across multiple cases related to the 2020 election and January 6th. The core of that defense has always been that Trump genuinely and sincerely believed the election was stolen from him. If he really believed it, the argument goes, then his actions were those of someone trying to correct a genuine wrong rather than someone knowingly attempting to subvert democracy for personal power. It's the difference between being wrong and being criminal. But that defense only works if there's no evidence Trump knew his claims were false. And now there's direct testimony from his chief of staff that Trump was repeatedly told the fraud claims weren't supported by evidence. Meadows warned him, others warned him, his own attorney general told him the claims were nonsense. And Trump ignored all of them and pushed ahead anyway. That's not good faith belief. That's knowingly pushing false claims despite being told they're false. That's the very definition of dishonesty and fraud. Prosecutors now have sworn testimony from an insider confirming that Trump knew the truth and lied about it anyway. Every defense lawyer in every Trump election case has to deal with Meadows' words now. They have to explain why the jury should believe Trump was sincere when his own chief of staff says he wasn't. That's an extremely difficult argument to make. The documents Meadows provided make the situation even worse because they corroborate his testimony with contemporaneous evidence. Defense lawyers might try to attack Meadows' credibility, suggest he's lying to save himself, claim his memory is faulty or his motivations are suspect. But documents don't have credibility problems. Texts sent at the time show what people were thinking and planning in real time. Emails documenting coordination can't be dismissed as misremembered conversations. Notes taken during meetings provide written records of what was said. When the documentary evidence lines up with the testimony, it becomes much harder to dismiss either as unreliable. Prosecutors can show the jury, here's what Meadows said, and here's the document proving he's telling the truth. That's a powerful combination that's very hard for defendants to overcome. Second point, Meadows' cooperation represents a fracturing of Trump's inner circle loyalty that has broader implications for how people around Trump behave going forward. For years, Trump has relied on the loyalty of his associates to protect him from legal accountability. They've refused to cooperate with investigators. They've taken contempt charges rather than testify. They've gone to prison rather than flip. But Meadows was the chief of staff, as inner circle as it gets. And he cooperated extensively. He got immunity and told the truth. He handed over documents. He testified multiple times. If someone at Meadows' level will cooperate, who else might? What other longtime loyalists might be looking at their legal exposure and calculating that cooperation is better than going down with the ship? Trump's response to Meadows' cooperation, eventually pardoning him despite the betrayal, sends a complicated message. On one hand, it might be seen as Trump forgiving Meadows and trying to rebuild loyalty. On the other hand, Meadows already did the damage before any pardon was possible. The testimony exists, the documents exist. Pardoning him now can't change that. And other potential witnesses might look at this situation and conclude that cooperation is the smart play, and you give prosecutors what they want, you get immunity or a deal, and maybe you even get pardoned later anyway. The incentive structure for loyalty is breaking down when cooperation seems to work out fine for the cooperator. Third point, Meadows disavowing parts of his own book is particularly significant because it shows how the public narrative around the 2020 election was deliberately constructed from claims people knew weren't true. Meadows' book came out when he was still trying to maintain his relationship with Trump and his standing in MAGA world. It told a story that supported Trump's claims and portrayed the stolen election narrative sympathetically. Many Trump supporters read that book and had their beliefs about 2020 reinforced by someone who was in the room. Now, Meadows is saying under oath that parts of what he wrote weren't accurate. He was telling people what they wanted to hear rather than what he knew to be true. This matters beyond just the legal implications because it reveals how disinformation spreads through supposedly credible sources. Meadows wasn't some random Twitter account pushing conspiracy theories. He was the White House chief of staff writing a book about what really happened. People trusted him as a source because of his position and access, and he was apparently willing to mislead them for political purposes, only admitting the truth when he was under oath and facing legal consequences for lying. How many other books, interviews, and public statements from Trump insiders have followed the same pattern, saying what's politically useful rather than what's actually true? Meadows' about-face under oath should make people question everything they've been told by Trump allies about 2020 and January 6th. Fourth point, this testimony connects to and strengthens the other legal cases against Trump by establishing a pattern of dishonesty and criminal intent that prosecutors can reference across proceedings. We've been tracking how the various cases against Trump are interconnected. The classified documents case shows him knowingly keeping materials he knew he couldn't possess. The hush money case shows him covering up information to influence an election. The January 6th and election interference matters show him pushing claims he knew were false to overturn election results. Each case stands on its own evidence, but they all tell a consistent story about a person who lies when it benefits him and breaks laws when they get in his way. Meadows' testimony adds powerful confirmation to that pattern from someone who witnessed it firsthand at the highest levels. Prosecutors in the classified documents case can point to Meadows' testimony about Trump's dishonesty on election night and say, this is how he operates. He lies when it suits him. He was dishonest then, and he was dishonest about the classified documents too. Defense lawyers will object and try to keep the cases separate, but the pattern of behavior is now established in the record. Juries hearing about one case will inevitably be influenced by what they know about Trump's conduct in others. The cumulative weight of evidence across all these matters paints a picture that's increasingly difficult to reconcile with any narrative of Trump as an honest actor who just made some mistakes. So where does this leave us as we process the implications of Meadows' betrayal? We have the former chief of staff on record under oath confirming that Trump knew his election fraud claims were baseless and pushed them anyway. We have documents from inside the White House showing Trump's direct role in pressure campaigns and planning for January 6th. We have Meadows disavowing his own book's defense of Trump. We have the good faith belief defense in shambles. We have inner circle loyalty fracturing. And we have all of this feeding into multiple ongoing legal proceedings that keep revealing more and more evidence of Trump's knowing participation in efforts to subvert the 2020 election and obstruct the transfer of power. Trump pardoned Meadows, but he can't pardon away the testimony. He can't erase the documents from prosecutors' files. He can't unring the bell of his chief of staff telling a grand jury that the president of the United States was dishonest about the election and knew it. That testimony exists forever in the record now. It will be cited in legal proceedings. It will be referenced by prosecutors. It will be used to impeach any defense claims about Trump's sincere beliefs. Meadows made his choice to cooperate and tell the truth. And that choice has consequences for Trump that no pardon can undo. The walls keep closing in. The immunity claims keep failing. The evidence keeps piling up. The insiders keep flipping. And now the chief of staff himself has confirmed under oath what many Americans already suspected, that Trump lied about the 2020 election and knew he was lying when he did it. That's the kind of revelation that doesn't fade away. That's the kind of testimony that shapes how history remembers a presidency. And that's the kind of evidence that makes criminal conviction increasingly likely in cases where Trump is already facing serious legal jeopardy. Keep watching, because the Meadows testimony is going to continue reverberating through every Trump legal proceeding for years to come. Stay tuned.